Very good evening to everyone. I would like to welcome our audience and our panel to this evening's webinar, which is hosted by Harley Street Fertility Clinic and is on lifestyle and fertility. And so I'd like to first introduce this evening's panel. So this evening, our panel consists of Dr. Venkat, who's the director at Harley Street Fertility Clinic, and Dr. Norbert Gleicher, who is the medical director at the Center for Human Reproduction in New York, and Dr. Divya Parker, who's a patient and guest speaker of Harley Street Fertility Clinic. And my name is Dr. Venkat, and I will be your host this evening. So first, I would just like to get some housekeeping out of the way. We will have approximately three presentations that will last approximately 45 minutes in total, and they will cover lifestyle factors from Dr. Venkat, and then nutrition and in particular nutraceuticals from Dr. Gleicher, and a patient's view of her journey from Dr. Parker. This event will be recorded and will be uploaded on our website for you to review in due course. All of the audience microphones and cameras are off, so if you wish to ask a question, you may submit it via the question and answer panel on the platform, or you may raise your hand and we can unmute your microphone during the Q&A session. You can stay anonymous, that's absolutely fine. There's no need to say your name, and your camera can remain off. So without further ado, I will hand over to our first speaker this evening, who is Dr. Venkat. Thank you.
Hello, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this webinar. This is an interesting one, and as you can see, we have guest speaker from across the water, and we also have a representative from your side, which will be interesting to listen to. First, I would like to disclose that I have no competing interests. The next slide, please, Suvir. Right, so I am going to talk to you about the basics. Basics are the important subjects in anyone's life. If the foundation is strong, everything will be fine over that. If the basics are shaky, then nothing will materialize. And most of these factors which I'm going to mention today are all common sense factors. If you think about it, I'm not going to tell you something new. And however, you would like to hear it from a professional and the importance of why you should do this. That's why we are covering this topic today. And as you know, we live in this world. Our environment is an important place for us, but we have no control over this. However, we have to adjust our life in such a way that we get the most benefit from the environment. That is why we say living near the green areas, near the park, and getting all the good oxygen and avoid all the pollution is very important. But we all live in this congested city of London, and of course, Dr. Gleicher is in New York, which is similar to us. But we try to avoid these polluted areas and go to areas where there is a lot of trees and plants, sit among them, because as you know, the plants make use of this sunlight, and they make use of the carbon dioxide in the environment, make the chlorophyll. That's why we get the green color in the leaves and the plants. And what they do is during the daytime, they emit oxygen, which is good for us. And that's why if we sit near to the plant, we get more oxygen, our body will be better in this. And the next one we are going to talk about is the nutrition, and all these mentioned. I'm not going to read one by one, but I will go through the details. Suvir, could I have the next slide, please? Yes. So in the environment, what are the things we should try to avoid and what we should welcome with both hands? That's what we must know. And I mentioned like good air quality is important. That's why we stay nearer to the green areas. But there are other factors in life which we come across, like using the plastics, which have become very fashionable in the modern days. and they cause a lot of disrupting chemicals. These are called endocrine disrupting chemicals. That means they disturb the hormone pattern in the body. And the important ones are bisphenol A, which is present in these are called estrogenic chemicals, and they disturb the hormone imbalance or disturb the hormone balance in the woman's body and interfere with the reproduction. And basically, they cause poor quality eggs, and the embryos created under these circumstances have poor morphology, and they stop growing, or sometimes suddenly we find that the embryos arrest, and we don't know why. These are all because of the underlying chemicals, and there are studies to support this, which I mentioned now. Similarly, perfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS, and phthalates, they come in this group. And again, there are studies to support that these are all chemicals which interfere with our body and affect reproductive function. So they affect the egg quality in women and sperm quality in men. And some women, they are found to reduce the ovarian reserve as well. So that's what we see, that air pollution is linked to the decreased fertility and impact on ovarian reserve and impact on sperm quality. They are all mentioned in these studies. You can see the references there. So where could I have the next slide, please? And therefore, what we should do is avoid this plastic. So plastic is quite convenient and attractive as well, because it's easy to carry stuff in plastic and then throw it at the end of the day. But when the water comes into contact with the plastic, it absorbs the chemicals by the reaction with the plastic, and we drink it, and it is not good for our body. So what should we do? Please avoid plastics in your life and use glass instead, because glass does not have these chemicals interacting with our drink or food or anything. And similarly, when you are eating food, try to eat fresh food instead of packaged one, especially which are wrapped in plastic material. That is not good for us. And similarly, when we talk about environment, when we go for walks or doing some exercises, running, it's better to do in area with good air quality rather than poor air quality. So don't start running on the pavements of the road. It's not good. So where can I have the next slide, please? Yeah. Okay, now we come to the nutrition. Of course, there are people who can talk about nutrition for hours, and there are so many books written on nutrition. But I'm going to tell you the basic things which are key factors in the fertility treatment. One is folic acid, vitamin B12, and omega-3 fatty acids. Basically, you eat a healthy diet which contains all these factors I have mentioned. Lots of fruits and vegetables, which is the one which Mediterranean style diet consists of. So that's what we recommend. And as we all know, high sugar, saturated fat, and lots of coffee in the day has got a negative impact on fertility. We should try to avoid all these things. Of course, they're all tempting to us. But I always say, look, avoid all the stuff you like, then life will be better for you in the reproductive way. Not in general, but that is the way life is. Next slide, please. Next is the weight, that is healthy BMI. The height and weight relationship is expressed as BMI. Ideal BMI is between 19 to 24. So healthy weight can increase your chances of getting pregnant. And being overweight again affects the quality of the egg and the sperm, reduce the chances of getting pregnant. And we know that affects the embryo quality at the end. That is why we say being overweight or obese is not helpful to get pregnant. There is one more thing associated with obesity. There are a lot of inflammatory changes in obese women, and that causes inflammatory issues, interferes with the implantation of the embryo. And that is why we say all these natural killer cells, cytokines, and thrombophilia issues are more common in women with the high BMI. That's why it's not very friendly for the fertility issue. And similarly, you think that overweight is a problem. However, underweight is also a problem. We have seen some patients who cannot gain weight, which is very unbelievable in this, in this century. And there are some women with BMI of 16 and 17 in our clinic who are struggling. I tell them, look, go and eat whatever you want. This kind of advice is given by me very rarely because we don't have many people struggling like this. But again, it has effect on their menstrual cycle, ovulation, and lining of the womb. So it causes lots of problem. In life, everything has to be optimal. Don't go to the extreme. That doesn't help. Next slide, please, Suvir. When we talk about weight, then everybody says, oh, I decided to lose weight. I'm going on this crash diet. Oh, I'm going on this high protein diet, avoid all the carbs and everything. They do it for 1 month, 2 months, or 3 months and lose weight. But what happens once it is stopped, immediately they put on weight. I don't think it's a good idea to start like this for diet or changes. We should make small steps and also integrate the whole thing in our lifestyle. Get it into your routine. You must be eating salads and fruits and vegetables as part of your routine diet. Don't do it only for 3 months. That doesn't help. So start slowly with small baby steps and then slowly increase the effort. It will pay you. So the real mantra here for keeping the weight down is move a little more and eat a little less. That will make a big change in your weight slowly and steadily. That is very important. Next slide, please. Yes, exercise again, it is the same thing. We must do moderate exercise, which is possible. Don't start exercising every day in the week and then you can't maintain it. Therefore, plan it well and do the exercises accordingly, which can sort of fit into your routine, because we should not neglect the other things in life. You should be able to live a life. You are not living only for the exercise. So moderate regular exercises. And for people who are sort of not started doing exercises, start slowly. Some physical activity, some walking, and then increase the step, increase the pace, and start running later. So start with the small achievable goals and then slowly raise the target. And minimum we say is 30 minutes of physical activity every day will be very, very helpful. And like I said, just don't sit all the time. Keep moving around. So move a little more, few more steps, and reduce the amount of food we are eating. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, we'll think, okay, sleep. What is there to talk about sleep? This is again one of the important things in life. People are advised to have good night sleeps. What is good night sleep? Generally, we say average of 8 hours of sleep or 7 to 9, depending on the personality. Each individual is very different, because this is the time when we are resting all our organs and everything, body muscles and everything. The rejuvenation happens, regeneration of the cells and the tissues happens. Therefore, our body gets better. It's able to perform better when you get up in the morning next day. And similarly, the ovaries and the testes, they will do better job when you have a good night's sleep and lack of stress and everything. That's why we say it's important to have good night's sleep without any anxiety, restful sleep, and even being in sunlight. They say it helps in the sleep, helps with the sleep, because being in the sunlight helps us to, yes, so next slide, thank you, Suvir. When we say we are talking about sleep, when we expose ourselves to the sunlight, our body secretes melatonin. And then body reacts to this melatonin. It is the one which maintains our circadian rhythm so that our body falls asleep. We are able to sleep around 10 o'clock in the night. As the sun goes down, the sunlight disappears and it becomes dark, and then we are able to sleep. But if at the same time someone is very anxious and they can't relax and they are so stressed, then it doesn't help. They are not able to sleep. So spending time outdoors with nature and sunlight helps you to freshen your body, relax your mind, get the melatonin you need, which is the sleeping tablet, all of you know. But there is one new function we have found out about melatonin. That is, again, because of this, it helps with the quality of the eggs. So I usually advise my patients to take it 1 month before the treatment. Therefore, it improves the quality of the eggs. Next slide, please, Subir. Okay, these are all the vices, we call them: smoking, drinking, and recreational drugs, steroids, which some men and women also take, especially sports personalities. Again, these are all not good for the body. Say, for example, smoking and taking steroids causes, smoking particularly reduces the amount of oxygen in the body. So the tissues and the cells are exposed to more carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, and lower amount of oxygen. Therefore, the cells and the organs are not able to function efficiently. That's what we need. And so we think that, okay, I'm not smoking, it doesn't matter, so there is no problem. But if your partner is smoking, or there is somebody in your house who is smoking, you will become a passive smoker and you will be affected as well. And again, binge drinking and lot of drinking alcohol, a lot of it regularly is not going to help with the sperm count and the egg quality and other things. That is the reason we say avoid all these things. We had a patient, a lot of people know them because they are celebrities. And the gentleman he told me, look, I used to use a lot of steroids and other drugs before regularly, and his sperm count, oh my God, it was so low, and they were not moving. It was the worst sperm, one of the worst sperm we have seen. Then I told him, look, you have to change. If you want a baby, you have to change your lifestyle. You have to start living like a saint. Otherwise, no baby for you. Because I said it so strongly and everything, he said, okay, doctor, I will change because of your advice, because they wanted the baby so badly. And he changed and he did everything. And he said, I am doing yoga and so many things, meditation to improve my stress, etc. But you may not believe, when they came for egg collection, his sperm count was 79 million. According to WHO, the minimum sperm count we need is 15 million, and his was 500,000, 250,000 before. And it improved dramatically because he's changed his lifestyle so much. Therefore, some people think that it is not important. Oh, I'm a healthy person, I only smoke occasionally, it will be all right. It is not. And I'm happy to say that his partner is now pregnant, which is wonderful, that because she never had a pregnancy before like this. This is all because they changed the lifestyle, and I'm very, very happy about them. Next slide, please. Other factors, stress is everywhere, that stress in any part of the body, and stress in your mind affects your body generally. Psychological stress, depression, anxiety, we are scared about everything. Some people are scared, oh my God, if I start the IVF treatment, it might fail. What will happen then? Well, you won't get pregnant if it fails, but if you don't start the treatment, don't do anything, you will only fail. You will not be successful. We must learn to face the life, face the world, and this is for you are doing. And if you need help, please seek the counselor or whoever you think will be able to help you. Talk to your people, family and friends, and you must try to help yourself. That's why it's important when you're doing, to come with positive mind and go through the treatment. Next slide, please, Sudhir. Okay, thank you very much for listening to me. And I want to add one sentence here, say we and my staff at Holly Street Fertility Clinic, we believe that we must do everything possible on earth to make all the patients pregnant. And this is our aim and goal. I wish all of you the best. Thank you very much. Thank you, Kay.
Thank you very much, Dr. Venkat. And so at this point, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Gleicher, who is going to talk about nutraceuticals.
Okay. It's very nice being with you this afternoon here in New York and this evening in London. I appreciate the invitation, and I was asked to use my 15 minutes to provide an overview on the impact of nutrition on infertility. And you have already heard the general overview of how important nutrition in general is, and I therefore will more concentrate on what we can do in a pharmacological way in supplementing our day-to-day nutrition, in other words, in using supplements. And in the US, the supplement industry has enormously grown over the last few decades. And there are very significant differences, one of which indeed strongly affects us in infertility, because it involves the use of androgens, and specifically the hormone dihydroepiandrosterone, or DHEA, which for rather bizarre reasons here in the US is considered an over-the-counter supplement, a nutritional supplement, yet in most of the rest of the world is even a controlled substance, because it is obviously a steroid hormone. So there are certain differences in how we use those supplements, and I will go into that when we talk about the individual supplements. Next slide, please. It is important, which also by our first speaker today was pointed out, this is a subject that applies both to females as well as males. It matters what we eat. It matters how we supplement what we eat with supplements. And even though we tend to concentrate on the female in infertility in general, it is important to remember that roughly 40% of all infertility stems from the male, and if anything, that percentage has increased because sperm counts are radically declining, especially in the more developed world, and not the least probably because of environmental factors, as the preceding speaker so well outlined. Next slide, please. And as she also clearly stated, the fertility of a couple can be affected by a whole variety of factors, dietary risk factor, other lifestyle factors, socio-demographic risk factors, psychological risk factors, but what we put into our bodies obviously has quite significant impact. Next slide, please. This is the reference, and can we go to the next slide, please? What I will concentrate on in the remaining minutes of my talk is supplements for which we consider there exists significant scientific evidence. As I already stated, our nutraceutical industry in the US has exploded, and the infertility field has not been an exception. I can tell you that some IVF centers in the US give their patients a list of 20 supplements that they should start taking. That is not what we propose or support. what I will be concentrating on in those next few minutes is on selective supplements for which we believe convincing evidence exists that they indeed improve fertility chances for either women and or men. This does not mean that supplements that I will not be mentioning here may not have effects. But what it means is that we, at the current time, at least at our center, the Center for Human Reproduction in New York City, we advise our patients that we are neutral in regards to them ingesting those other supplements. There are some supplements where we clearly advise patients not to take them, but there are many supplements where we have simply not enough information, either in the positive or in the negative, to exert an opinion. And I would say that the majority of our patients is taking some of those. What I will be talking about here, however, are those few supplements which we feel in many patients are essential in improving the true chance of conception as infertility patients, usually in an IVF cycle. Next slide, please. As a disclosure, it's important for you to know that I do have potential conflicts in the sense that I am a co-owner of quite a number of patents, and some refer to supplementation with androgens during fertility treatment. So you should take that in consideration when you hear me talking about androgen supplementation of infertile women mostly. Next slide, please. So for all supplements, the options are using them in females or using them in males. The supplement that in the US is probably today the most frequently used supplement, and which also has become very popular around the world, is supplementation of women with low ovarian reserve with androgens. Now, androgens, the male hormones, are produced in women roughly half in the ovary and roughly half in the adrenal glands. And deficiency, therefore, deficiency or excess, therefore, can come from either one of those glands or from both. And I will come back to this point. But it has been established initially in small animal models that particularly the early stages of follicle maturation, the so-called slow-growing, small-growing follicle stages between primary follicle and the small antral follicle, are very sensitive to androgen levels. In mouse, this was demonstrated for the first time. And if you knock out the androgen receptor in mice, what happens is the whole follicle maturation process gets arrested. And if you don't completely knock out the androgen effects, but just diminish them enough, you end up getting few eggs and poor quality of eggs. In other words, androgen level, good androgen levels are important for normal follicle maturation and for good egg quality. And this is important because we always used to think in the past that androgens are bad for women. Too much androgen is bad. That is, of course, true. But women's ovaries need good androgen levels. The second group of supplements that are very extensively used in the US and at our center are antioxidants. And like with androgens, there is little human research data on it. And therefore, it also all started with mouse experiments. And like with androgens, they have gone from small animal experiments to larger animal experiments, and finally to some investigations in humans. And like with androgens, it has been demonstrated that the addition of antioxidants improves egg quality. There's no evidence, to the best of my knowledge, that it affects egg quantity, but antioxidants do improve egg quality. Indeed, there are many colleagues in our field who strongly believe that one of the reasons why eggs from older women don't produce the same pregnancy rates as eggs from younger women is because they run out of antioxidant activity, in a sense, because the mature egg is the biggest cell in a woman's body. It therefore has the largest number of mitochondria, and the mitochondria are the batteries of the cell. And therefore, eggs need a lot of energy. And when we are giving them antioxidants, we're basically recharging the battery. That's the rationale for giving patients good antioxidants, and I come back to it. Now, we have also started in the US to supplement with human growth hormone, and my understanding is that some of our British colleagues are using it too on occasion. But we do it much more rarely than some of the proponents. And the reason is a very simple one, because we believe that most patients really don't need it. Human growth hormone was very prominent in the early days of IVF. And then it kind of disappeared from the scene only over the last few years to again become popular. But like androgens, it is very important to understand why human growth hormone can be useful or may not be useful. It can be useful because human growth hormone does not in itself work on the ovary or on follicular growth. It works through what is called insulin growth factor 1, IGF-1. It induces the production of IGF-1, and it is really IGF-1 that then enhances ovarian function, whatever it may or may not do. And the time period where this is happening is exactly the same time period that I previously described for androgen supplementation. In other words, it is the time period from right after recruitment of follicles, primary follicle stage, till small preantral follicle. And therefore, like with androgen, it is very, very important that if we must supplement for at least 6 to 8 weeks before an IVF cycle starts, because those very early stage follicles still need 6 to 8 weeks to reach maturity and become available in an IVF cycle. Therefore, if you supplement only during the IVF cycle or even shortly before, you will treat the next generation, the next months or 2 months down the road follicles. You will not treat the follicles that you wish to treat in that given cycle. Moreover, we see no rationale why we should treat with human growth hormone if patients have normal IGF-1 levels. And therefore, before we consider whether a patient should or should not be supplemented with human growth hormone, we always measure IGF-1, and we only consider those that have actually low level, just as we would not treat patients with androgens, with DHEA, if they have normal testosterone. We obviously treat for a purpose, and we don't prescribe aspirin for headache if the patient doesn't have headache, and the same principle applies here. So those are the three supplements that we use quite frequently in our infertile patients, and I will come back to details in a moment. In males, we use very little, to be very honest, and we use in principle antioxidants. Our preferred antioxidant is still CoQ10, both in women and men, and we use it at very high doses, and that means about 1,000 milligrams of regular CoQ10 or 600 to 800 of ubiquinol. Next slide, please. What I'm showing you here in the study from Walters is the androgen receptor during the different stages of follicle development. And you can see that the androgen receptor is induced very early on in follicle growth, and that it reaches a peak at the small preantral and early antral levels. And the receptors obviously assign that those are the stages where androgen supplementation is most needed. This is just in documentation of what I told you before. Next slide. And this are the first 4 lines of a much larger table from a recent paper by Walters et al. In the Journal of Endocrinology, where the authors summarized the history of androgen supplementation in infertile women. And as you can see, the first one to suggest that was Casson, who at that time was at Baylor in Texas, who reported a small series of patients who produced very small egg numbers, and claimed that by giving them DHEA, he got more eggs. We were totally unaware of his work until one patient brought this work to our attention. It was a very smart woman who came to us at very advanced ages, and in her first IVF cycle only produced a single egg. And we initially even didn't want to do a cycle on her because we felt she was too old in those days at 42. This is now 15, 16, 17 years ago. But she talked us into doing it. And after we got only 1 egg on her and 1 embryo in her first cycle, I said to her, that's it, we're not going to do more. And she literally on her knees begged for a second cycle. So I said, okay, 1 more. And in her next cycle, she produced 3 beautiful embryos. And so we went on. And the next cycle, she had 5 or 6 or 7, etc. She had 11 cycles. And after the 9th cycle, we had to actually reduce her stimulation dose because she had PCOS ovaries and she threatened to hyperstimulate. Cut a long story short, after her 6th cycle, while we were scratching our hair, trying to understand what was happening to this woman who now already had become 43, she came smiling into my office one day and said, Dr. Gleicher, I have to tell you a secret. And the secret was that she had gone to the medical literature. She had picked up Casson's paper, amongst some others, that have claimed that they could improve egg numbers in older women. She chose Casson's because, as I mentioned before, in Europe, the use in the US, the use of DHEA doesn't require prescription. She said she could use it without having to tell me. And that was the beginning of our research on androgen effects in infertile women with low ovarian reserve. And you can see that in this historical timetable, our colleagues published in the Journal of Endocrinology, the next 3 papers on the subject came from our center. And we have published extensively. And if you are interested in detail, we will be happy to provide you with further information or reprints. Next slide, please. So I mentioned already that female antioxidants in females recharge the batteries in the cell, and that is particularly important for eggs. Next slide. And I also mentioned that human growth hormone works through IGF, and therefore we do not feel that human growth hormone is indicated in women who have normal or even high IGF levels. Next slide. In males, androgens are contraindicated in principle because they suppress paradoxically sperm production. That's why patients who are on steroids or on testosterone, particularly athletes, do this very frequently, can become azoospermic. So no androgens for males. Next slide. Antioxidants have in males, both in animal and in human experiments, shown quite significant effectiveness. Indeed, we routinely prescribe them for males who have abnormal semen analysis. And as I also already mentioned, CoQ10 is the antioxidant we usually use at high dosages. Next slide. Human growth hormone, there is no data in males, and we do not use human growth hormone in males. Next slide. So let me summarize. DHEA supplementation is a routine at 25 milligrams 3 times a day at our center in all women with low ovarian reserve. That means women over age 40 and younger women with either high FSH and or low AMH for their age, even at younger ages. They all are on DHEA supplementation and on usually CoQ10 supplementation. That is our routine, and I must say that has changed our center's practice. We now use this protocol for basically 17 years with modifications over the years, of course, but it has made us into a center that serves patients from all over the world who have failed IVF cycles elsewhere. We feel very strongly that this kind of supplementation in many of these women makes a lot of difference. As I already also mentioned, human growth hormone we use selectively and much more rarely than many of our colleagues do these days. Next, final slide. This is our brownstone in Manhattan, and the names on the list are my collaborators. I thank you for listening to me. I'll be happy to answer some questions.
To your speech. We're going to hold questions to a Q&A session at the end because I already see quite a lot of questions coming in, and we'll get them to the right person on the panel. So just bear with us. But I'm going to next hand over to Dr. Parker to give you the patient's perspective of her journey. So thank you very much.
So good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. As Dr. Venkat and Dr. Venkatraman highlighted at the beginning of this evening, I'm a patient at HSFC, so if I've seen any of you around in the clinic or if you've seen me, apologies if I've not recognized you or vice versa. Hopefully we'll meet over the course of our treatment. But just to give you a little bit of information about me, I'm 38. I was diagnosed with stage 3 endometriosis in 2001, and that was in the run-up to my undergraduate degree finals. I would not recommend trying to study for your final examinations for a degree when you've just had major surgery. This regrettably progressed to stage 4 endometriosis by 2010. And what I mean by that is that I developed scar tissue, which meant that my womb and my large bowel were essentially stuck together because of post-surgical complications. 3 laparoscopies later, I did develop further complications, and I developed what's called intersusception of the large bowel. And for that, I do have a prop, and I did warn Dr. Venkat that I would explain this. So we all get told to eat well, look after ourselves, plenty of fiber, plenty of fluids in our diet. Now, hopefully you should be able to see my lovely grey sock here. Now, if you imagine that this is the large bowel, and as you can imagine, if it's contracting normally, food is moving along. But what happens if, now if I can do this here, what happens if it telescopes like this? So effectively, the large bowel chafes and rubs and things don't move along as normally as they can. And that has had an impact on the way I have to eat and manage my nutrition and my lifestyle as a result. My husband and I, we were blessed and conceived our jelly bean in late September, early October 2019, not long after we'd married. Unfortunately, we lost jelly bean in December 2019 at 12 weeks. And after 6 months, we felt that in view of my medical history and my age, that if nothing was going to happen naturally, that we would look for medical advice and started IVF. And I joined the Harley Street Fertility Clinic as a patient in July 2020. And my first cycle gave us one chromosomally normal or euploid embryo, who, if you've read any of my blog posts, was called Peanut. And unfortunately, we experienced implantation failure in January 2021. Next slide, please, Severe. So, as you may or may not have gathered from my writing, I'm in the middle of round 2. So to give you a little bit of an idea of what my diet and lifestyle involves, not just in view of IVF, but also around my post-operative complications. If any of you out there have got endometriosis, you may or may not have been told for many, many years, it's just IBS. I'm sorry, it's just IBS, you'll be fine. And then told, unfortunately, that you've got endometriosis. The kink in my intestine that I explained with my lovely sock prop also gave rise to what's called a small intestine bacterial overgrowth, which basically means that the bacteria, which normally function and help us process our food before obviously it passes out of the body, were not staying put in the large intestine, but were in the wrong place. So that involved me having to go through a lot of tests and a lot of antibiotics. And this has happened to me 3 or 4 times in the past 5 years. So the result of this was that I had to overhaul my diet. And I didn't think my diet was that bad to begin with, but clearly something was not agreeing with, something or many things, in fact, were not agreeing with me. And you may have heard the term FODMAP talked about on the news or on the television, or even read about it in papers and magazines. And I won't go into the definition there. Suffice it to say that it is quite a mouthful, and it basically covers a host of fermentable carbohydrates within food that can, in susceptible people, cause a great deal of gastric distress. And it doesn't just cause gastric distress, it can actually interfere with the way your stomach behaves and functions, which then means that you may not even be getting the most out of food that is agreeing with you, because your stomach is still trying to recover from whatever has set you off. And I should point out that this FODMAP diet was developed with as part of a collaborative approach with a gastroenterologist and a dietitian who was in fact doing her PhD, and they were faced with a host of patients who had all been labeled as having IBS, and they didn't know what to do. They came to Professor Peter Gibson in Australia and Sue Shepherd, the dietitian. And it turned out that all of these patients were experiencing difficulty digesting some of these fermentable carbohydrates. So the idea of my FODMAP diet, and I don't really call it my FODMAP life because I want my life to be a little more than my diet, involves working out how much of certain foods you can eat before they trigger symptoms, or if there are any foods that don't agree with you at all. And as you can see in the picture there, there's an app available on smartphones. I do have one on my phone, and it helps me navigate a range of fruits and vegetables that I can or cannot eat, or that I can eat small amounts of, or that I can eat as much as I like of. So for me, it's very, very important to eat fresh fruits and vegetables, but I have the added challenge of knowing which of those fresh fruits and vegetables I can comfortably digest. I should also point out that I was very fortunate to have full support from a gastroenterologist who guided me in this approach. So this was not something I took upon myself. I really did need the help to get started with this, and now it's become part of my daily life. Next slide, please. So, as I said, I'm now in round 2 of treatment. So just to give you a little bit of context on the healthy eating front, take a look at the list on the left-hand side, and that's the FODMAP diet of the no's and yeses. Now, take a look at the list on the right-hand side. Now, the sorts of things on the right-hand side are foods that have been recommended to be either avoided or cut down significantly if somebody has endometriosis, either because of the hormones in meat, for instance, or dioxins in lamb, that is another one. Processed food as well. But look at, can you see any similarities in the yes list? So no-brainer, water's on the list. Dairy, non-triggering fruit and vegetables, lean meat, fish, vegetarian substitutes if you are a vegetarian. FODMAP friendly nuts. Believe it or not, I can't eat every type of nut there is. You would think walnuts, pistachios, cashews, perfect. I can't eat pistachios, so I have to be very careful with the foods that I pick. Tea and coffee, again, within limits. As Dr. Venkat did highlight, excessive caffeine consumption can have a detrimental impact on the run-up to egg collection and the likelihood of success of an embryo implantation, basically too much of what we feel is a good thing. But you can have tea and coffee. So for me, I have 1 cup of coffee in the morning and either very weak green tea as the day goes on, or 1 cup of a proper builder's brew, if you will. And what I'm very relieved to say is on the yes list on both sides is dark chocolate and certain FODMAP friendly treats. So I'm a big believer, especially on this journey. It is hard. I will be the first to hold my hand up to it. It is hard, and I'm sure all of you out there know just how difficult it really is. And to be told constantly, no, you can't do this, no, you can't have that, it can become a little exhausting. So for me, thanks to this diet and with the guidance of my gastroenterologist and also Dr. Venkat, I can have my cake and eat it. But I just make sure that when I have that cake, it's worth my while and made with proper ingredients, recognizable ingredients, and it's as fresh as it possibly can be. Next slide, please. So this montage of pictures gives you an idea of how I tackled my physical and mental health before and during IVF. Now, as I said, I've got stage 4 endometriosis, and for any of you out there who have this condition, it can be very tiring, and you may have been told or referred to as feeling tired all the time. And you can't seem to shake it. And yet it seems difficult to understand that how am I supposed to stay active if I'm so exhausted? As Dr. Venkat said, some exercise is better than nothing at all. And there are no absolutes in this journey any more than there are absolutes in mine. And so I found that low impact exercise has always been the way for me to go. I can tell you I was absolutely rubbish at high contact sports, terrible at hockey, terrible at tennis. In my early 30s, it turned out, after years of being convinced I was terrible at sports, I was a water baby. Who knew? The pandemic, as we're all aware, closed down a lot of activity and leisure facilities. So we all were all stuck indoors, and I found that given that I couldn't swim, which drove me up the wall, I took to 30 minutes of low to moderate impact aerobic exercise every day. And that was not just for me to build my stamina for myself, and also in the as I recovered from round 1 and prepared for round 2, but it probably also kept me a little sane as well. Other low impact activities I enjoy are yoga. And if you want to know who that furry friend on the slide there is, that's my Labrador, Christy. And she is our fur baby. And she keeps us on our toes, and it's you'd be surprised how tiring it is having to run after her when she decides she's not going to come back when you call her. She's going to go after that squirrel. So lots of dog walks are a regular feature of my life, and I also enjoy having a massage whenever I can to help me de-stress. And this goes back to a point that was made earlier. Find a way to de-stress that works for you, whether it's massage, whether it's going for long walks, whether it's baking, acupuncture, whatever it is, find out what works for you. And if you look over to the right, take a look at the quote. And I think for anybody who has experienced implantation failure, pregnancy loss, miscarriage, whatever you want to call it, a loss is still a loss. And jelly bean and peanut will always be my favorite what ifs. And not a day goes by that my husband and I don't wonder what if. And living in a neighborhood when we're surrounded by lovely schools, and now that the schools are opening, all the children running in and actually thrilled to be back to see their friends. We're making our peace with it, but you know, the pain and the loss will always be there. And if you are struggling, it's so important not just to think about getting your body in gear for this journey ahead, but to get your mind in gear as well. And I admit to speaking to a counsellor on a regular basis when I was really struggling, because after the first treatment failed, the first thing I thought was, what have I done? Did I make a mistake? What did I do? And it's an inevitable part of human nature that we look to ourselves and think, what happened? And the simple fact is there may be no obvious cause, or especially on a complicated journey like IVF, a cause that probably has to be explored in a great deal of detail by higher authorities. So sometimes it helps to speak to somebody, whether it's a counsellor, a friend, anybody at the clinic, to get what's troubling you out of your head and out into the open so that you can move forward, because nobody deserves to be unhappy and held back like that for any reason. And another thing I found that helped was keeping a journal. Now, there are fertility-specific journals around, and I found that they were quite helpful remembering lots and lots of appointments coming thick and fast. But they also helped me, as I said, do a little bit of a brain dump on paper so that I could then go to sleep, wake up the next morning and start again. Or it can just be a blank diary and you can just write whatever you want. And sometimes the physical act of putting your thoughts to paper and either closing the book or even throwing the paper away can be pretty therapeutic. Next slide, please. So here's what happened in round 1. I was taking coenzyme Q10 melatonin. And as Dr. Gleicher and Dr. Venkat said, these are known to be used as antioxidants. Melatonin, of course, in higher doses than is used for IVF, is also used as a sleep aid. I wish I could tell you that I was sleeping deeply and far more profoundly thanks to melatonin. I can't really tell you that, unfortunately. And I was taking folic acid. I was doing exactly as most international guidelines recommend for antenatal and perinatal, so when a woman is pregnant, the sort of supplements that they should be taking. And I thought, okay, I'm doing everything by the book. It turned out after egg collection, when we ran the quite an extensive battery of tests given my medical history. So we went through the immune screen, a clotting screen, and Dr. Venkat felt, given my history, that it might be worth checking for the mutation in that gene. So if you want to know what that MTHFR is, it's methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase. Why do all the important things sound like such a mouthful? Now, this enzyme is responsible for converting folic acid, as we get from Boots, Superdrug, any pharmacy, and most general supermarkets even have folic acid, converting it from that inactive form to active folate. And I won't go into the details excessively again, but most of us probably know why we need to be taking folic acid: to prevent spinal defects in the growing baby. But I had a mutation in this enzyme, which meant that my body wasn't very good at activating bog standard folic acid. So I could have been taking folic acid to the letter, and it may not have been doing what it needed to be doing because it wasn't being activated. Being of Indian ethnicity, I was also taking vitamin D regularly, and I've been taking this for years because for many years I was tired all the time. And after seeing a gastroenterologist who ran some blood tests, and generally blood tests are a good way of checking how things are at baseline level, turned out I had severely low vitamin D. I can tell you, when the vitamin D started getting put into my body at quite high doses, and I'm now on a much lower dose, I certainly felt a great deal better. So we went from 8 embryos after egg collection in round 1 to 4 fertilized, 2 embryos, which we then had biopsied for pre-implantation genetic testing, aneuploidy, so PGTA, which you may have seen on the clinic's website. And it turned out that we had 1 euploid embryo who was Peanut. So we were cautiously optimistic because Peanut was a very high quality, high grade embryo. We carried on, and unfortunately we had implantation failure. So it felt like we were going back to the drawing board, but not quite, because we had learned a lot about how my body worked in round 1. And of course we had identified the folic acid enzyme mutation in round 1. I had also continued taking the CoQ10 and melatonin. So after embryo transfer and obviously stopping all of that, I restarted again in January, and getting back on the horse in that sense was probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. And I wouldn't wish that on anybody, but you have to start somewhere. And as Dr. Venkat has said in some of her earlier talks, you wouldn't want to do an exam if you haven't done the homework or prepared for it. So in terms of preparing for round 2, the supplements were my preparation. So Severe, if you click on That's it. So what happened this time? I took CoQ10 3 months before egg collection, melatonin as well. Vitamin D, as you know, as I said before, has been going on for a while. Now, what changed was that I added DHEA. I will admit I didn't take it in round 1, but I did in round 2. And that was started 1 month before egg collection. So bearing in mind, I'd had the buildup of all of the antioxidants to hopefully improve egg quality and prevent oxidative stress damage to the DNA in the eggs for quite some time. And then we added DHEA here. Then, as I mentioned before, we switched from folic acid, so inactive folate, to active folate. So what changed? If you click severe, this time, okay, we started off with 8 eggs. The quantity was the same. This time, 4 fertilized, and this time 4 embryos were sent for genetic screening, and 2 came back as chromosomally normal. Now, it's from a patient perspective, it's so easy to look at all this huge abundance of supplements and think one of these has to be the one that works. Not necessarily. It's not necessarily one supplement that is going to be the make or break. It's the sum of all of these evidence-based supplements that attack the issue of oxidative stress damage to the DNA, that boost your egg quality via so many different pathways. Think of it like a jigsaw puzzle. Now, we went from 1 normal embryo to 2. Now, on the one hand, you could say, oh, only 2. But compared with what happened in round 1, we have actually done 100% better. Both euploid embryos, I'm sorry, I haven't named them yet, are a good grade. And I was also handling egg collection a great deal better. Recovery was a lot better as well. So next slide, please. So what else changed? So take a look at this table here, and you may or may not have seen an immune screen that is sometimes offered to patients with recurrent miscarriage or implantation failure or difficulty conceiving. Now, in the context of the fact that I had endometriosis since the age of 21 and 1 miscarriage with some pretty horrendous post-surgical complications, Dr. Venkat wanted to do the immune screen from the beginning. And you can see the second column shows roughly what the normal range should be. Those were the numbers in 2020 in the third column. Now, in case you're wondering what these parameters are, these are all, without going into too much detail, these are all parameters indicating inflammation in the body. Now, this is it's a continuously evolving field of reproductive medicine, and there are tremendous numbers of papers saying that there's evidence to say that that immune dysfunction is a major issue, that it isn't an issue. Personally, I feel that it's hard to do a clinical trial in a field like this simply because of the ethics. How can you study pregnant women or women trying to conceive in this context? But the evidence is mounting. And I had slightly elevated CD56 and Th1, Th2 cytokine ratio, which suggested that there was an abnormal amount of inflammation in my body. And one of the theories is that women with endometriosis do have an unusual amount of inflammation, are prone to allergies, which, as my family will attest to you, I've had horrendous allergies in the past. And yet in 2021, all of those parameters have either significantly reduced or normalized. Now, Dr. Venkat gave me the results of this latest blood screen result less than 2 weeks ago. And I have to say, I was genuinely stunned. And this begged the question, could all of the preparation before round 2 even started, I was still eating well within my restrictions, but I'd started the supplements well before even the first injection touched my tummy. So could all of the preparation have changed what could be the bigger picture here. The fact that the inflammation in my body has come down, that my body could be cooperating a little better. Next slide, please. So what else changed for me as we went from round 1 to round 2? The first one is a very loaded word for many of us, and it's so hard, but so important to remember that we can only control certain aspects of this journey, not everything. And we didn't ask to have fertility concerns. We didn't ask to experience miscarriage, pregnancy loss, but it isn't our fault. And by forgiving myself, I was able to move forward and make constructive changes to my physical and mental well-being that I genuinely believe stood me in good stead for round 2 and whatever's coming next. What else changed was that I remembered that who I was and what mattered beyond fertility, that first of all, I was a human being. I'd studied very long and hard, that I thoroughly enjoyed my job. I have a wonderful husband, a lovely, very cheeky Labrador, that there was so much more to me and my identity beyond the IVF, which is why I tend not to call myself an IVF warrior, because for me, it brings up images of anger. I don't know. It's a very subjective thing. But I'm me first and an IVF patient next. So the third thing that changed was that I was making the changes to my health and well-being for this bigger picture, and it just happened to be that treatment would hopefully benefit from it. And I also learned after adding the DHEA to the first 2 supplements that I showed you, that not all supplements are bad or unnecessary. And with supplements, it isn't always IVF, and it can get quite stressful and quite exhausting being confronted by all of these supplements and any number of people telling you to take all of them, and having to get your head around all of it. It's a lot to take in. And I think what has been a big help is that everybody at the clinic, on the clinical team, has been so supportive in explaining what happens as part of your treatment, why you need to take certain supplements, why you shouldn't take certain things. So if in doubt, always ask. I learned to make the most of my life beyond treatment, and my husband and I found that despite the tragedy of January, one of the, I think the second most important thing after forgiveness was relearning normal. Once you set the foundations in place, as Dr. Venkat says, eating well, get back to being you, trying to get a decent amount of sleep, re-establishing routines that make you you, you remember that you're you first and a patient second. I also made a concerted effort at self-care and stress management. And now I am the worst offender when it comes to slowing down, and I try very hard not to get stressed, but I think with endometriosis, you learn that when you have relapsed, you've got to slow down, you've got to take it easy. But when the going is good, oh, you want to run and do everything like everybody else. But you've got to remember certain limitations. And those limitations, whether you have endometriosis or PCOS or fibroids, they will be individual to you. So just look after yourself. And the other most important thing that changed at the bottom there, my constant daily reminder. I was quite naive, in spite of having a medical background, thinking that, well, if we're doing IVF and we're throwing everything in the kitchen sink at it, we're doing the immune treatment, the steroids, all of it, surely it has to work. No, that would be perfect. That would be what would happen in a perfect world, but life isn't like that, unfortunately. Fertility treatment is a journey, and it takes as long as it takes and as much help as it needs from your care team and you. This is a real team effort. The clinical team are behind you every step of the way, and they will tailor your protocol to you down to the minutest adjustment. But it goes both ways. As a patient, I feel that my responsibility, not only to myself, but to the care team looking after me, is to be in the best physical and mental condition I can possibly be and make the most of whatever help that I need to be ready for whatever is coming. Next slide, please. So if I was to say anything to you, it would be all of these. Maybe try and think of the bigger picture. It's easier said than done. And we're still in the middle of round 2. If I had a crystal ball and I could tell you what's going to happen next, I don't know. I will say I'm handling things pretty well this time. But all of these changes to your lifestyle, your diet, may be part of your fertility treatment, not just for the ladies. To Dr. Gleicher's point, it's for the gentlemen as well. It could benefit you in the long run. And put it this way, if you've got to make some difficult decisions and have difficult conversations, the last thing you want to be doing is having those kinds of conversations when you're exhausted and burnt out. It may not be a single change that could make the difference in IVF, but the sum of all of them. Prepare your mind and body with good food, the right supplements. Don't feel too overwhelmed with a wall of supplements. Pick the right ones for you, and of course, stress management techniques that work for you. Seek advice and support from qualified professionals when dealing with medical conditions and significant lifestyle changes. So by that, I mean, you have my commiserations if you're on a FODMAP diet like me, but please see a gastroenterologist or a qualified dietitian if you feel you need that support. And especially if you've got a complex medical condition like endometriosis or an autoimmune condition. This also includes thyroid conditions, as what you eat can influence how your thyroid functions. Try to stay active, but don't burn out, and stick to low to moderate impact. Make a fool of yourself in the kitchen with YouTube. I do 30 minutes every day and it keeps me sane. Find any outlet beyond treatment that brings you comfort. My way may not be your way, and your way may not be someone else's. Do what's right and comfortable for you. And remember, this is your journey. Comparison, human beings learn by comparison. And it's so easy to fall into that trap to say, well, it's working for her. Why isn't it working for me? Oh, well, his sperm quality is better. And, he's a pro athlete. Or worse still, I'm the pro athlete. And why is my sperm quality so poor? This is your journey, your race. And finally, try, easier said than done, to be kind to yourself. And good luck on the journey. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Divya. That was a very inspiring talk, and thank you for sharing a very personal journey with us. So now we will come to the Q&A, and so this part, I will field the questions and pass them on to the panel, if that's okay. So the first question that we have is from a patient who says, or a lady who says, I'm overweight, not obese, and I'm thinking of freezing my eggs. How long before freezing my eggs should I be exercising and eating well before I do the initial tests? Or is it better to do the initial tests anyway and then go for exercise, diet, and come back to egg freezing? I would like to pass this on to Dr. Venkat, please.
Thank you, Suvir. Yes, my answer to this question is, first, know where you stand in the fertility chart. Therefore, it will be a good idea to have all the fertility checkup and know your ovarian reserve. Then that will give you a motivation for you to lose weight, and also the time frame for your treatment. If you know that you have to do it within 3 months, and you have a goal for each month, each week, and each day, like 10 grams each day, then 100 grams a week, something like that. You have to plan, make your own plans, and it's better to do the checkup first and then plan your treatment and make sure you're of the optimal weight. Give yourself time, but depending on the reserve, supposing you don't have so much time, then we have to plan your treatment early. Thank you.
Next question we have, it's someone who says, I'm 36 years old. I have had IVF and 20 eggs were collected, but only 1 embryo. I had that embryo transferred, and after 6 weeks, I had a miscarriage. did I not have good quality eggs? I'd like to pass this one on to Dr. Gleicher, if I might.
Yeah, so the answer is yes. Unfortunately, this patient did not have good quality eggs because there is a range of expectations of how many embryos one should get from X number of eggs. And she's clearly below that number. And what that tells me is that something in her preparation for the cycle or in her cycle planning hasn't worked, because this should not happen. Either she should have more embryos if she's being cultured to blastocyst stage, or what is probably more likely in most of these cases that have this kind of a discrepancy between egg and embryo numbers is that not only should they have a different kind of stimulation, but their embryos should not be cultured to blastocyst stage, but in our opinion, should be transferred on day 3 at cleavage stage.
Thank you. The next question, we've actually got quite a few questions on miscarriages and immunological factors. And if I can try and summarize a few of these, the questions come up and say, with regards to miscarriage, even if someone has had a normal pregnancy, can they still develop immunological factors, which I presume they mean inflammation-related issues? And how can this differ between IVF and natural conception? And the second part is, can recurrent miscarriages be caused by male factors as well as female factors? So I'd like to hand this to both doctors in turn, if I might, and to get your views. So first, I'd like to pass this to Dr. Venkat, please.
Thank you, Samir. Yes, there are few questions here: miscarriages, causes, and what are the factors relating to miscarriages. If you analyze the situation, miscarriages can happen due to embryo quality first. Say, if the embryo is not chromosomally normal, that is what is called euploid embryo, then it can cause miscarriage. That is why I tell my patients that I don't like to transfer the embryos blindly. That means we are just putting the embryo. Appearances can be deceptive here. Don't think 4AA embryo is very good embryo, so it will give you a healthy baby. We don't know that. So it could be due to embryo quality or chromosomal normality of the embryo. That could be one cause for the miscarriage. Or if we have excluded that, then other side of the story is implantation factors. Anything to do with structural abnormality of the uterus can cause miscarriage because of the space problem there, or immune factors. That is, these are all the immunological issues which cause inflammation in the uterus, and they affect the blood supply to the fetus or blood supply to the embryo when it's implanting, and can also be affected by the inflammatory process. And in layman's term, we say that the body rejects the embryo. So this can be caused. Therefore, even if we transfer a euploid embryo, if the embryo environment is not good, then implantation will not happen, or it will be a dysfunctional or defective implantation, which can lead to miscarriages. That's why we have to think that it can be from the embryos or it can be from the implantation side. There are few tests you can do to find out where the problem is. So we analyze them systematically, and the treatment would be, like I said, doing the pre-implantation genetic testing to exclude any embryo factors, and do a hysteroscopy or saline scan to see if there is any structural abnormality of the uterus, and then the immune factors, immune issue, or, whenever there is some thrombophilia issue like the clotting issues or antibodies, which are all common with immune disorders and natural killer cells and cytokines. And these are the issues which can cause miscarriage, and if it is persistent, can lead to recurrent miscarriage. Thank you.
Dr. Gleicher, if I may have your view on this as well, please.
Yeah, I don't have much to add here. As was just stated, the most frequent cause of miscarriages are chromosomal abnormalities. The second most frequent cause is a hyperactive immune system, and that can be either due to autoimmunity, which can be subclinical, does not have to be obvious, inflammation, or can even be in women who are just hyperallergic, who are allergic to everything. So we don't like hyperactive immune systems, and as was also said, we don't like inflammation in women who are trying to get pregnant. Where we here at CHR a little bit disagree is with the concept of chromosomal testing of embryos. We are not big fans of that because we consider it a very unreliable test, but with a lot of false positives, and we hardly ever recommend chromosomal testing of embryos. One of the questions posted was also, can it happen after a normal delivery that an immunological pregnancy loss occurs? Not only can it happen, but it is the natural way how it usually happens, very, very frequently. Immunological pregnancy loss starts after one seemingly normal pregnancy. And the explanation for that is kind of the same as with an allergy. When you're allergic to penicillin, the first time you get penicillin, you will just have a little rash and maybe itch a little bit. But when you're exposed the second time, you may have an anaphylactic reaction. Same thing here. First pregnancy sensitizes the immune system. The second exposure then causes much more significant clinical symptoms. So yes, you can have one baby and then all hell can break loose in your immune system.
Thank you. The next question that we have is, how does DHEA use affect the baby or the embryo? Is it true that testosterone levels should be monitored, or even DHEA levels themselves should be monitored? And I'd like to pass this to Dr. Gleicher, if I might. Yeah,
that's a very good question, and indeed a question that we hear very frequently. DHEA in itself is a mostly inert hormone. What I mean by that is that in order for a hormone to work, it usually, at least to a significant degree, has to attach to a hormone receptor, which takes the message from the hormone into a cell. DHEA has very low affinity to the androgen receptor. So DHEA really itself doesn't do very much in our bodies. Its importance lies in the fact that our bodies make testosterone from DHEA. And it is the testosterone that then has the various functions. This is exactly why we prefer to use DHEA rather than testosterone when we try to raise testosterone levels by giving DHEA. Because if we give testosterone directly, it floods a woman's whole body. Every organ gets the same concentration of testosterone. If, on the other hand, we give a woman the precursor DHEA, the substrate, that substrate floats in her blood, and every organ takes as much of the substrate to make its own testosterone that it needs. Therefore, when you treat patients with DHEA, the risk of overdosing is almost nil. While on the other hand, if you give testosterone directly, there's very high risk of overdosing. And therefore, we prefer to give DHEA rather than testosterone directly, even though it takes a little longer to get the desired equilibrium in testosterone levels.
Thank you. The next question that we have is, do you have any recommendations on probiotics for infertility? And I'd like to pass this on to Dr. Venkat, if I might.
Thank you, Suvir. Yes, probiotics play an important role in everybody's functioning of the body. Like Divya mentioned, her gastric functions, intestinal systems were so much disturbed due to the endometriosis, and she had to see the specialist to correct everything, to change her diet and lifestyle to make things optimal for her body. And we know that we take probiotics to change the gastrointestinal flora to make it better for us. Similarly, they have done research and found that the uterus should have a favorable microbiome environment for the implantation of the embryos. Previously, we all thought, when I was a medical student, we used to believe that uterus was sterile. We can't see a single organism inside. That is not true at all. We see organisms in the uterus, and good ones and bad ones. So that is why there is a new test now called endometrial receptivity assay. And with that, we take a biopsy to see and check the implantation window for each woman, because it can be different and individualized. Therefore, we can perform personalized embryo transfer according to the implantation window. At the same time, with this biopsy, we also do what is called EMA and ALICE test, which look for any evidence of chronic endometritis inside the uterus. What it does is causing inflammation. That's why Dr. Gleicher mentioned just now, and Divya also mentioned in her talk, this inflammatory process in the body is generally not helpful. It causes symptoms, makes one feel very tired, body ache, muscle ache, and all these symptoms. But inflammatory process inside the uterus is worse, because that prevents or interferes with the implantation of the embryo. And that's why we check it with the ALICE test, and the test called EMA. We check the microbiome in the uterus. That will tell us what is the percentage of this lactobacillus in the uterine cavity. We should have at least 90% lactobacillus, which is the favorable environment for embryo implantation. If it is less than that, it is not favorable. So we have to give extra probiotic, not orally, vaginally, to improve the local environment in the uterus. So when we did this test, we found that some of them had 96% and 98%, 88%, that was normal. We also had a couple of patients where the lactobacillus concentration was 0%. There was no way this patient would have got pregnant if we didn't know that, because she never had any favorable bacteria. Most of her bacteria was the pathogenic bacteria causing, pathogenic organisms causing inflammatory process. So we had to give her a course of antibiotic, correct it, and then put her on this long-term probiotic treatment before we started the embryo transfer cycle. So we gave it for 3 months and it improved. And then in the end, she got pregnant. Therefore, the probiotics is also important. We have to pay attention to every detail. Attention to the detail is key to success in not only IVF, in every aspect of life. So this is very important as well. Thank you for this question.
Next question I have is, what doses of coenzyme Q10 and DHEA do you recommend as standard? I'd like to pass this to Dr. Gleicher, if I might.
The standard dosage of DHEA we use is 25 milligrams 3 times a day. And the standard dosage of CoQ10 we're using is roughly 1,000 milligrams a day. And CoQ10 comes in different capsule sizes, 100, 200 milligrams, and one product comes at 333 milligrams. So we prefer that one because our patients can get 1,000 milligrams out of 3 capsules. But the difference with CoQ10 between different products is not the same as it is for DHEA, at least in the US, because it is freely available without prescription over the counter, there is a lot of bad DHEA being sold. And therefore, in the US, it is very important that the patient use a good DHEA. With CoQ10, the differences are much less pronounced, except that there's standard CoQ10, or there is, as I already mentioned before, something that is called ubiquinol, which has slightly better absorption, and therefore the dosages given can be a little lower. And with ubiquinol, all that is required is about 600 milligram a day instead of 1,000 milligrams.
And as a follow-up question, someone's asked, what percentage difference does DHEA make in women over 40 in terms of their success rates?
That is a very difficult question to answer because, as you heard, I believe from all 3 of us this afternoon, infertility is so multifactorial. And what I can tell you, therefore, are just general trends. Younger women with low ovarian reserve derive more benefit from DHEA supplementation than older women. In other words, if you are a younger woman, and by that I mean under 38, maybe even 40, and you have high FSH or low AMH, you are the ideal patient for DHA and CoQ10 supplementation. Indeed, if you are especially young, we may even give you 2 or 3 months just DHA and CoQ10 and let you try getting pregnant on your own. And we see in those patients still decent spontaneous pregnancies just by raising their testosterone levels through DHA. The older you are, the less the benefit of DHA. And then there's obviously the additional factor of, is your ovarian reserve only low because of your advanced age, or did you start even lower and were prematurely aging your ovaries, and therefore you are even lower than your age compatriot who has the same age but has slightly better ovarian reserve. So I cannot give you one answer to that, except that DHA to very significant degrees improves clinical pregnancy rates. It actually also reduces miscarriage rates, as we have shown years ago in a study, which probably has something to do with egg quality and number of chromosomal abnormalities in embryos as a consequence. But its effectiveness depends most of all on age, but also on other cofactors for infertility.
Thank you. And one third part to that question is, there was one quite keen observer. What does the PQQ supplement noted on your slide do?
That's another interesting question, because PQQ came on the market as a fertility supplement only relatively recently. And frankly speaking, there's no data out there except for anecdotal data, and some people claiming that they have had better pregnancy rates with PQQ than with CoQ10. We don't have data to support that claim. We have not done any studies on PQQ. I have no objections for people taking PQQ, and more of our patients take products that sometimes have both CoQ10 and PQQ in them, but we're still waiting for a study to give us some hard data.
Thank you for that frank and informative answer. The next question we have is, any recommendations on stress management techniques? And I'm actually going to pass this over to Dr. Parker, because I think that would be the best response.
So thank you very much for that question. First of all, stress. Anybody says the word stress to you, that's almost like saying, how long is a piece of string? Now, stress can sometimes be a good thing in our lives in that it motivates us to make positive changes to improve our situation, from, you know, the extreme example of running away from the big cat chasing you. You've made a change because you're under stress, to the very negative consequences of stress, where you feel helpless, tired, you're not sleeping, you're not eating well, or making the right lifestyle choices. I think because stress is so subjective, logic follows that what it takes to bring down a given person's stress levels will also be very unique, and it will be subjective. So again, a lot of this is about trial and error. So you have to find what works for you. But the sorts of things I know from personal experience that have helped me a lot are talking therapies. So talking to a counselor, a therapist, or even as part of a support group, if that helps. It can be specifically for IVF if the key stresses are in the context of treatment, or if there are other things going on in your life that are just becoming very difficult to manage, especially in the context of treatment now being a part of your life. I find that helps. Doing activities that keep your brain thinking, but not too hard, if that makes any sense. So sometimes doing, playing Scrabble. I love playing Scrabble. You would think as a medical writer that I would be winning every single game against my husband, and that is not true. After my working day is done, I switch off, and you would be surprised how stupid I can be. But the point is that it gives us both a reason to laugh. Other things that have worked for me, I can't play high-impact sports for money, but I can walk for England. So give me a pair of comfy walking shoes and a nice wood, and I will walk all day if I want. So it's about finding your physical limit on that front. I love to bake. And no, it's not because of the Great British Bake Off, and I think it's also on the other side of the pond as well. In terms of actual sort of go, leave the house and do something to bring your stress levels down, I've tried acupuncture. Massage is also a big help, and also from the perspective that if it boosts blood flow to your pelvic area, that can also be a very good thing in the run-up to treatment, although you have to be very careful when you do start treatment to make sure that obviously the therapist doesn't touch the sensitive areas of your abdomen in case you do yourself an injury and experience what's called ovarian torsion. You do not want to be doing that before egg collection. So, by all means, a lot of this is exploration. If in doubt, by all means, ask your nurse or ask anyone at the clinic, is this okay for me to try? And just find what works for you.
Thank you very much. I have two last short questions. The first is for Dr. Gleicher. Would you recommend any different supplements based on the type of treatment the patient is having, for example, trying naturally compared to IUI, compared to IVF?
Under certain circumstances, yes. But what is really the determining factor, the overwhelming determining factor, is the patient's age and her ovarian reserve parameters. That also usually determines which treatments she should have. And the older the patient, the quicker we obviously go to IVF, because it is the most effective treatment that the patient can have with her own eggs. But otherwise, there are obvious differences. You will be more aggressive the higher in the hierarchy of treatments you go, and you will be less aggressive if you just more or less stand by and patients are trying on their own. Let me give you one very important example. Supplements that I have not been talking about because they are subject just on their own is how do we suppress a hyperactive immune system? How do we treat? We will rarely do this in an IUI cycle, at least not fully, because the drugs we're using in that kind of a framework have a lot of side effects, and we don't want patients to take those drugs for long times. So we restrict that to just IVF cycles in most cases. But when we talk about DHEA or CoQ10, it's different because those are medications that have practically no side effects or very little side effects. And therefore, we very frequently freely prescribe them even to patients who are just trying on their own.
Thank you very much. The last question we have is, it says, is it normal to have cramps after embryo transfer and to feel your heart as if it's going to beat out of your chest? And I'd like to pass this on to Dr. Venkat.
Well, these symptoms like what we call palpitation, when you feel that your heart is going to jump out of your chest cavity, that is the palpitation. You feel that every heartbeat so strongly and you can hear it so loudly. That is palpitation. And then abdominal cramps. Some women are prone to these abdominal cramps, especially if somebody has intestinal issues like IBS, that can cause intestinal spasms and cramps, and then uterine cramps can be associated. But generally, when we put something inside the uterus tends to have some amount of cramping. And that's why we give this anti-cramping agent. We give atosiban, that is oxytocin inhibitor, before embryo transfer, especially if people have IBS, and also if they have had cramps following the previous embryo transfers. And some people also have anxiety. This palpitation and cramps, butterflies in the stomach, these are all sometimes symptoms of anxiety as well. It cannot be due to some pathological changes or due to the real contraction of the uterus. It could be anxiety which could be causing this. The important thing is to reduce the anxiety, calm the person down. Some stress relieving techniques or medications might help under these circumstances.
Thank you. And then I'd like to move on and to wrap up. So thank you all for the very nice questions that we've had. I feel like they've provided a very useful discussion. I think in summary, I'd like to say that we encourage everyone to make small lifestyle changes, but do ask and try and get more information if you're unsure. And as a friendly reminder, please don't forget to remain safe because the pandemic continues to be present, and consider getting vaccinated. Our next webinar is on male fertility and is on the 11th of June at 7:30 in the evening. And if you're interested, please, you're welcome to join us. I'd like to actually conclude with a message that we got from a patient who attended this evening's webinar. who's written very nicely, we're all such a family, and I want to thank all of you who have been supporting me and are still with me at this stage. I'll do my best to not stress and take deep breaths and keep praying. And I'd like to thank the panel and Dr. Parker for sharing her experience. It's very heartwarming, and whatever happens to me, I'll do my best to follow your lead of keeping going and staying strong. So thank you very much for that, for those, I've lost my words. I feel like those words put it very well. I'd like to then thank this evening's panel. So thank you very much, Dr. Venkat. Thank you, Dr. Gleicher, and thank you, Dr. Parker. It was an honor to hear you all speak about this very interesting subject. And I'd like to wish everyone a good evening and a lovely weekend. Thank you all very much. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Gleicher and Divya.
Yeah.
Thank you. Inspiring talk.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Okay. All the best. And as he said, stay healthy.
Yes.
Thank you. You too. Bye now.